So one peptide I really love is BP157. Now, I know I'm not the only one. This is, or at least it was up until recently, I guess, one of the most popular peptides of all. And this is really because of its ability to heal. That's the number one thing you could say about it. So BPC stands for Body Protective Compound. And then 157 is just due to the chemistry of it. So what does that actually mean? So this is an interesting one that a lot of other peptides we talk about are produced in glands and sometimes organs, but usually glands. So BP157 is something that's created in the organs, but the organ is interesting. It's created in the stomach. Why that's interesting is because the stomach is mainly known for destroying stuff, right? It's for breaking things down with the extremely low pH acid rather than creating something. And yet that is exactly what it does. And so I have a theory about this, which is not too common that I'll share. But before we get into that, so your body creates this super fast healing substance in your stomach, which then, because that's the direction that digestion will go, goes from the stomach to a duodenum, down to the small intestine, large intestine, etc. So my theory about this is like, what would happen to a person's digestive system if they were not creating an optimal amount of BPC 157? I think that the digestive system would start to deteriorate. It would start to have little tears and micro tears. Maybe the tight junctions wouldn't be as tight. You'd start to have intestinal permeability. You'd start to have more, inflammation. Maybe you'd start to have cysts, ulcers, all of this kind of lesions, all of this kind of stuff, right? Because the acid in the stomach is very, very acidic. It burns. It can be as low as pH 1, which is something like, you take it out and you put it on the surface and it could just burn through it. Like, this is seriously, seriously acidic. So you got seriously, potentially dangerously high level of acidity in your stomach. And then you got seriously toxic, dangerous levels of toxicity in your gallbladder, which we talked about in detail in the episode Liver and Gallbladder, the toxic bile theory, the idea that bile actually is probably the most toxic substance in the body. And that is why the liver has such a fantastic ability to regenerate, because it has to, because it's continually being burned by this bile. So it has to keep regenerating. So when we're talking about regenerating, one of the best things for regenerating is BP157. So I don't think it's a coincidence that your body creates this BP157 just at the site of and upstream of the two main areas that are going to be burned and worn away by your body's own fluids. And even, the content of the large intestine is pretty toxic as well, right? And so that's, if the content of the large intestine was in most places of the body, it would cause serious damage. If the content of the liver was in most places in the body, it would cause serious damage. If the content of the stomach was in most places of the body, it would cause serious damage. So it would cause serious damage everywhere else. But even though those environments are just said are made for that substance, there's still going to be some damage, right? And I think that's the reason why your body creates BP157, is to help the body recover from that ongoing damage from these very toxic substances. So that's why I think it's a really great idea, because I feel like, many people in the modern age, doctors, scientists, but also, in the ancient systems, going back a long way, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they say that the gut, the intestines, the digestive system is the root of most illness, maybe because often it's where inflammation starts, which then becomes systemic, maybe because of many other reasons, toxicity that we just talked about. So supporting that digestive system, both by calming that inflammation down, which is more of a thing for TB4, which often is partnered with BP157, but also by helping to actually recover, is really, really key. So it's really, really beneficial for the digestive system. I believe it's also very, very essential for the cardiovascular system. We talked a lot in the full episode we did about the cardiovascular system, how it's micro tears in the like the walls of the arteries especially, and other areas as well, that then the body forms clots around it, and that clotting, when it becomes excessive, can be life-threatening. But it's like, why is there an excessive clotting in the first place? My understanding is it's these micro tears. And so again, having something which encourages and helps your body to heal more quickly is super beneficial for that process as well. Let alone what it's actually commonly used for, which is injuries, right? You twist something, you break something, you tear something. This is where BPC 157 has really become famous for athletes, especially, being told it's going to take 6 weeks to recover, and then it only takes them a week or two, something like that, with these high doses of BP 157 and TB 500 and maybe a bunch of other things as well. But these are often considered the key things that help you to heal so quickly. So I'm a big fan of BP 157. I use it pretty much every day for this reason, because like I said, even if I haven't injured myself, now I say pretty much because sometimes I forget to take any peptides. But I mean, if I'm taking a peptide, it's going to have BP 157 in it. It's going to be part of the mix because, first of all, I'm not in a state of perfect health. I still have there's heavy metals in me, which I know are, again, damaging things, burning holes in tissues and stuff like that everywhere they go. So to get support with that healing process is always great. It's always helpful. And then, secondarily, because the gut, right? The gut is constantly being assaulted by, even if we're healthy, even if we're in a situation of perfect health, like we're taking in toxins, we're taking in organisms, there's endotoxins that those organisms create. This is all just part and parcel of normal eating stuff and living. But as much as we can support our body in doing that, the better. Now, you may say, but Elwin, I'm in perfect health, I've got a perfect stomach, I believe it creates enough of its own BPC. Great, good for you. Peptides are really for people who are trying to optimize, but also who need it, right? So if you don't need it, then you don't need it. But I'm someone who has a history of having these issues, so I love to have BP 157.
I was going to ask, because you said it is made in the stomach, but then you were also talking about healing other parts of the body if you get hurt. So, somebody may think, oh, it's purely just for the digestive tract or the stomach, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
It's not true at all, yeah, because of course, I said to begin with about how it primarily is, in this area which needs a lot of healing. But of course, it's also in this area where nutrients are absorbed, right? So some of it will get absorbed, it'll go into the bloodstream, and then from the bloodstream, it can go wherever it needs to go. It's interesting that you bring that up because there's actually been research in that area. Because when people first recommended BP 157 for injuries, they would recommend injecting it right into the area of the injury to make sure it gets to the right place. But they researched that and quickly found that actually it makes no difference. Like, if you can inject it at any part of your body and it will go where it needs to go. Now, the advantage of injecting, we can talk about methods next, is what I just said. And so generally BPC is found in injectable. I've also seen it as intranasal. And it's, again, fairly commonly available in capsule form. In capsule form, they usually sell a form called BPC 157 arginate. So that's where it's bound to an arginine salt. And so this, they claim, I'm not 100% sure about this, but this is the claim made. If it's in that form, it's way better absorbed that way. Because the thing is, otherwise, a very small amount of BP 157 does get into the bloodstream through the digestive system. Not very much is digested. There's no definitive evidence about how much of the type that your body naturally produces is absorbed. But when I say the type, I mean it's exactly the same. Thymosin alpha 1, thymosin beta 4, and BP 157 are all bioidentical. So the type that you buy is exactly the same that's in the body. But what I mean is with BP 157, I don't know if the type your stomach creates is naturally bound to an amino acid, a salt or whatever. I don't know exactly how that works. I don't think anyone knows, but if you do, put it in the comments. So I don't know how much you absorb of your own BPC, but I would assume it's not that much as well. Because as I said, my belief, my hypothesis is that probably throughout history, we always had a lot of repairing to be doing in the gut. And so that's kind of where it's meant to primarily be. But of course, if you have somewhere else that needs repairing, then you need it in your bloodstream. And that's where it can be really, really helpful to use an injectable. For the intranasal one, I found this, again, I think if your sinuses are damaged, it would help. But I don't know how well absorbed it is through the sinuses into the bloodstream. My opinion is that not very well. I've heard people say 50%, so maybe half of it. So I think it's better than for the digestive tract, but to be honest, I found it slightly irritating for my sinuses, so I would prefer to inject it by far.
And are there any certain dosages that are recommended out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So orally, again, PP157 is another one that is not really about recommended. It's about how much can you afford, like, because very large amounts can be just fine. I've heard a tiny bit of stuff with BPC about how it's possible to have too much. I think it's conjecture. I don't think it's definitive. But because of those doubts, I think the amounts that are recommended tend to be less. So I think the dose that I've seen recommended is usually about anything from 100 to 250 microgram, which is between 0.1 and 0.25 of a milligram. So the tablets that I've seen, or the capsules I've seen, have always been 250 micrograms. Obviously, with the injection bottle, you choose it yourself, but they're usually sold in like 5 milligram bottles. So, yeah, I personally have not used more than 1 milligram, but I found 1 milligram to be just fine, no issues whatsoever. Of course, whenever you're dealing with any compound, there is a possibility of a reaction to it. But I'll say this, as someone who was very reactive in the past, who reacted to almost everything, I found that the only thing that my body seemed to have, and when I say reaction, the only reaction I got is like a little bit of redness around the site of injection, but that did not happen at all with 5% alpha 1, 5% beta 4, or BPC 157, or 5 million, because those are identical to what your body makes itself. If it's something that your body doesn't necessarily make itself, then you're more likely to have that reaction. Now, in oxytocin, you also get a reaction, but that's the reaction of oxytocin. Like, oxytocin has a big impact on your cardiovascular system. It can change your heart rate and stuff like that. But again, that's not like an immune reaction. That's just a reaction to the fact you suddenly got all this hormone in you. But yeah, so those natural peptides, I've had no itching, no redness, nothing that might indicate that, you know, I've had anything foreign into my body. And this is quite interesting. Like, it absolutely does happen with some of the other ones, like ipamorelin and the growth hormone peptides, for instance, which I think is because they are not natural, because they disappear so quickly. The natural ones in your bloodstream, they've had to modify them to make them last longer. And so that modification makes your body go, what's that? And like, give a little bit of an inflammatory response. Maybe. It doesn't happen to everyone. So I would not worry about having even a large dose of it personally, but of course everyone's different.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it as far as, you know, if there were any other safety concerns potentially with this one.
You never know how your immune system's going to react to anything. So it's always a concern. And so that's why, you know, we don't recommend anything, especially if you're injecting it. I think the concern about using it orally would be pretty minimal. I think for that reason, it's allowed to be sold just as a supplement rather than a medicine.